Good evening, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to our Living Life Skillfully College Voting Countdown. We are so excited to have you here tonight. We are days, hours, minutes, and seconds from one of the most consequential elections, definitely in my lifetime and in a lot of our lifetimes. And I just want to thank you all for attending this town hall on why specifically college-age voters and young adults, but why really everyone should be civically engaged. So this event is brought to you by Living Life Skillfully College Ministry at United Christian Faith Ministries. And the purpose of the Living Life Skillfully College Ministry is to educate students with biblical principles necessary for living life skillfully, bring college students to Christ through evangelism, outreach, fellowship, and mentoring, and provide outreach, which is study skills and spiritual and time management to college students, and also to provide an outreach to students in the community through service. So moderating our event today will be none other than our pastor, Pastor Mark Ellis, and I have a brief bio for the people who don't know him. Pastor Ellis is an inspired leader, business practitioner, evangelist, and mentor to many who has extensively traversed this nation, passionately sharing God's word. Pastor Ellis's messages have been a source of information, inspiration, transformation, and salvation to people from all across the world. Pastor Ellis graduated from the University of Southern Mississippi with a major in business administration. He has also received executive MBA certificates from the Darden Business School at the University of Virginia and Columbia University. He attended the Interdenominational Theological Center and received a doctorate of divinity in 2006. In 2018, he received a Boston College certificate in nonprofit leadership. Pastor Ellis accepted the call to ministry in 1996 and was ordained in the year 2000. Pastor Ellis founded United Christian Faith Ministries in 2001 in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Under his unwavering and compassionate leadership, the church has grown to over 2,000 members and counting, with over 40 active ministries. Pastor Ellis has meticulously served on the Church of God in Christ in many offices and on many levels. Most notably, in 2012, he was appointed by the presiding bishop, Charles Blake, and the board to serve as the chairman of the board and the CEO of the Church of God in Christ publishing house and bookstore. Pastor Ellis's work has included 20 plus years in sales and marketing as the vice president in sales and operations for Pitney Bowes Inc., a Fortune 500 company based in Sanford, Connecticut. And he's also served as the chief operating officer of the historic Rainbow Push Coalition. So all welcome our pastor, Mark Ellis.
Good evening, and thank you, my brother, Justin Franklin, for that long and perhaps even unnecessary introduction. I don't believe I need an introduction tonight for those who are watching, but I do want to say to everybody who is watching tonight, we want you to like and share, let people know we are live, because this discussion is going to be very impactful tonight. We have some wonderful guests. I think, Justin, you're going to introduce them. And then we're going to get right into asking the tough questions, share with you some data and statistics as it relates to the political process and how college students and young people affect that. And I believe God's going to lead us to some great outcomes tonight and perhaps even motivate more to get involved. So, Justin, I'll let you introduce our panelists tonight and we'll go right at it.
Well, first up, I'm a college student here at LSU. I'm a political communication major with a minor in history at LSU. I'm also a member of the Honors College there and a member of the Manship School of Mass Communication. So our first other panelist is Elijah Johnson, and she's a senior from Maryland studying mass communication and African-American studies at LSU. She is a chairwoman of the Black Women's Empowerment Initiative and the president of Black Caucus. She's also the political action director of LSU NAACP and the vice president of the National Association of Black Journalists at LSU and the director of diversity and student government. Elijah plans to attend law school in fall 2021 and pursue civil rights law. Welcome, everyone, Elijah Johnson.
Awesome.
So our next panelist is Chelsea P. Ryan. Kelsey is a senior student majoring in political science from Mobile, Alabama at the Southern University. She is an avid student, leader on campus, serving in many leadership positions, such as the current chapter president of SU NAACP. Since her freshman year, Kelsey has been passionate about civic engagement and encouraging her peers to utilize the ballot box as a way to fight for social justice. Kelsey will pursue a dual JD, where she will obtain a law degree and a master's of public administration or public policy. Our next panelist is Christopher Howard. Christopher Howard is a senior student in marketing from Baton Rouge at the Southern University. He currently serves as the co-chair of economic development for the Southern University NAACP, and he also serves as a member of the United Christian Faith Ministries Youth Department as a teen teacher. Chris plans to be a brand manager and also to be a writer. Our last but not least, our other panelist is Cameron Cryer. Cameron is a junior at LSU majoring in mass communication, and he is from Hammond, Louisiana. He serves as the president of LSU NAACP and the vice president of the Iota Tau chapter of Phi Beta Sigma fraternity. Cameron plans to work as a media strategist after undergrad. Welcome to all of our panelists, and thank you for being on this panel. I'm now going to pass it over to our moderator, Dr. Pastor.
All right. Good evening, everybody, guys. Thank you for carving out some time to share, and to our own director of Living Life Skillfully College Campus Ministry, Professor Dr. Christy Perry. I salute you for your leadership and being able to pull this off with such intellectual capital that's here tonight, that's willing to share their experience, their passion, their motivation for leadership. So I'm glad to be able to engage you guys on tonight. I want to start, though, by saying and sharing with our audience some statistics, and then we'll ask your perspective on certain matters. In 2016, in the 2016 election, the data said that 48% of college students voted. Now, that was a rate significantly lower than the national average of all Americans, which is 61%. 48% voted in the 2016 election. In 2014, only 13% of college students voted. Now, voting in 2018, it went back up to about 40%, which was still 10%. That was a midterm election, still 10% lower than the average for all Americans. All right. Now stay with me. Over the past 2 decades, graduate and undergraduate enrollment has increased from 13 million to 20 million after the recession. 20 million enrolled. What does that say if more and more young people are enrolled in college, but yet the participation in the civic process, voting in particular, has been decreasing? Will we even have a democracy? Is that a disturbing trend? And I think we'll start asking questions tonight, but I want even our audience to think about, what does this say about our democracy if we don't have civic engagement from our college students? So I want that to be on the backdrop of everyone's mind, because we know in order for a democracy to sustain itself, to deliver on its promises and its dreams, you have to have an educated society and one that participates in the civic process. Now, I'm going to start with ladies first tonight. Alasia, I want to know from you, and share with our audience, what inspired you as a student leader, to be civically engaged, whether it's now or years past? Talk to our audience tonight about your experience.
So that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. This is my first presidential election. As I mentioned, I'm from Maryland, so I am closer to Baltimore, but DC is still in my backyard. And being from that atmosphere, it is very hard to ignore politics. I think for me, growing up, I did notice, elections have consequences. And when I say that, I mean these local elections really determine what is going on in the community, where the funding goes, who's going to sit in these offices, where is the money going to go. So I think for me, looking at, you know, who is in the neighborhood, what's going on, where we're seeing our funding, whether it's in music or it's going towards military, or we're looking at these different programs. I think that's what really encourages and inspires me to vote, is thinking about my brothers and sisters or my cousins, my little nephew, looking at the community and my parents. I think that's what really inspires me to vote, and just the generations before us that really championed and challenged the idea of what it meant to be an American and what it meant to be a Black American at that. So I think the Black vote is very powerful, and that's something, that weight is what I carry when I go to the polls myself. So I think that's really pushed me to keep maintaining and realizing the power that it holds in one voice.
Awesome. Well said. Well said. Kelsey, you wanna share your perspective on what inspired
Yes, I
you?
would. Yes. So I think it has to do a lot with the fact that I kind of grew up around a civically engaged family. So I was that little kid that went into the polls with my parents during pretty much every election. And growing up in that kind of atmosphere where your parents drilled into your head, like, when you turn 18, you're going to vote. And just being involved in my own community, I saw the power of politics and just the power of voting at hand myself. So that definitely encouraged me when it came time for me to turn 18. I turned 18 after the last presidential election. So I was like, dang, I missed it by a couple of months. But as soon as I turned 18, I think at midnight, I registered to vote. And then we had I'm from Alabama, I'm from Mobile. And so we had the special Senate election between Doug Jones and Roy Moore, which got a lot of attention. So being able to say that that was my first election, I went to the polls with my dad, and then coming back on the other end, not only did Doug Jones win, but it was Black women who led that fight to create that historical moment. So not only did I get to say, like, as a Black woman, I put you in office, like I was that person, but just to know that I got to see my vote count right there, right then and there at my fingertips. And that was just an amazing experience. And that's something that I will carry for the rest of my life. I love telling that story. That's something that I'm going to tell my kids. And just every time that I think about why I get involved in civic engagement work, I always go back to that moment, and just knowing that, I mean, I think we can all say that we came from a generation that in elementary school, they brought the polls in, or they did like the fake ballots where you got to vote for Barack Obama and Mitt Romney. So being able to say that I did that and then actually got to do it for real, I don't know if y'all schools did that, but mine did. And so that was just like, it just full circle going back to that same moment, and it just feels amazing. And so I want to be able to replicate that with my peers and as well as people in the community.
Awesome. Well said. You're well on your way to be a pioneer. Cameron, I'm going to come to you with that same question, but then I want maybe, Cameron, you to address the data that we shared earlier in kicking off our session. Maybe speak to what inspired you, but why are yet so many college students uninspired? What are some of the factors that perhaps are contributing to that? First, share your inspiration.
Okay, so what inspired me to vote is actually the complete opposite of Kelsey and Alasia. Because of my lack of resources back home, I'm from a small town called Hammond, Louisiana, where politics play a big part into it, but we're all completely ignorant to the power of politics. So once I came to college, I started hanging around people that were actually involved and that were interested into politics, such as Justin and Alasia. They started informing me slowly but surely. So eventually I came to a point to realize that my vote matters, and that me informing myself and my peers, educating ourselves on politics is more impactful than me living a life day to day, imagining that politics don't play the role that they play. So ever since, I would say over the past couple of years, I've actually dove into and saw the actual power within those. But to answer your second question, if you could repeat it again for me, please.
What do you think is causing, in light of the data we received concerning so many college students are voting less than the national average? 48% versus the national average of Americans is 61%. What, in your opinion and or perhaps experience, what are some of the distractions and or causes for that alarming statistic?
Actually, although I'm disheartened by it, I'm actually not surprised, because through my experience, especially within the past few months, that's trying to advocate for this upcoming election, advocate for people to go out and vote. Malaysia hosted a voter registration table with NAACP not too long ago. We were trying to encourage students to come sign up. Just come register to vote. Simple. Put your name down, sign up, scan this QR code. And they weren't enthused about it, and they passed it, ignored it as if we weren't even talking to them. So I think the main issue is that we live in a domain. That we live in a bubble that's completely secluded and isolated from the rest of the world. I mean, I can speak for being at LSU. When you're at LSU, you don't really consider what's going on within the outskirts of Baton Rouge that are going on outside of Louisiana State University. A lot of my peers, not only myself, a lot of my peers, they lack the resources and the knowledge as to why voting is important. So they get comfortable within being at LSU, within going to Tigerland, going to class. My main focus is make sure I get this degree, to where they overlook the importance of actually casting your vote, actually informing yourself, watching the news, all these small things that trickle down into you and how your life after college will resume and how you will handle things accordingly afterwards. So I think that's the biggest issue. Just us living within a bubble and forgetting about the real world outside these 4 years, 5 years, 6 years that we will actually spend in college.
Well said. Well said. Justin, maybe speak 30 seconds or less. What inspired you to be as a leader? Know a little about your background, phenomenal speaker, great acumen. Speak to what inspired you and any insight you may have on that statistic of why so many college students don't vote. Cameron said a mouthful, and I'm going to come back to some of the key words you guys are using. So Justin, share with us quickly.
Yeah. And I'll start with historically. My grandfather in Tennessee, there were two counties in the 1950s that had more Black people than white people. That was Hayward County and Fayette County. And my grandfather was a business owner in Fayette County. And when it came time for them to register to vote, the white people in Fayette County actually created a blacklist for these people. If you actually tried to register to vote, they put you on this blacklist and you couldn't come into their business. You couldn't live in their properties. And if you needed stuff for your store, if you needed stuff for your business, they wouldn't supply it to you. Wow. So that was their way of disenfranchising the people of Fayette County. So they created a grassroots movement. You can look it up. It's called the Fayette County Movement, where they said enough is enough. And it actually garnered national attention by what they did in Fayette County. And I say that to say that a lot of us don't understand the historical context of why we need to vote. And, they always say, fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice, but we don't understand history will repeat itself if we're not paying attention. And of course, you can point to externalities of, students might be away. They're not in their state where they're supposed to vote. They're not in their city, so they don't go home. There are some externalities that probably contribute to that low number. But most of it is just students, like Cam was saying, they don't care. So when we learn our history, understand our history, I think we have no choice but to be civically engaged.
Well said. Well said. Absolutely. And lastly, Chris, speak to your inspiration and perhaps your experience with the apathy among young college voters.
Okay, so the reason that I was inspired to be civically engaged was because of the community that I grew up in, being in Baton Rouge, going to different schools with all different type of people. You see amongst the young people that we don't believe in voting. A lot of the times we're uneducated on how it works. Some people believe that it's some type of magic trick where once you vote, then all your problems get solved. So when they see that not happen, then they become discouraged, right? So I felt like I needed to educate myself and be an example inside my community so that when other people look at me, they'll say, out of curiosity, why are you so engaged? And then I have that opportunity to explain to them. And that also contributes to why so many young people, especially college students, don't want to vote. Also, speaking to personal experience, Kelsey and the rest of the NAACP at Southern University hosted voter registration also, where we tried to get students to register to vote, and then we had the drive into the polls. So many students did not want to vote, and when I would ask them, why you don't want to come vote, it doesn't matter. Nothing happens. It doesn't work. People have adopted that narrative of how voting, my vote doesn't count. They gonna do what they want to do. They already know who's gonna be the president. They already know who's gonna be the governor. Like, we don't believe in the system anymore. And I believe that the people who are trying to continue to oppress us are using that as an advantage.
Wow. You guys are so ahead of the curve in so many ways with perspective and insight. And I want to applaud you. I mean, every story from being, in the environment there in Washington, D.C., to being brought to the polls early by your parents, to having to inform yourself because of perhaps the degradation or the lack of access and resources coming up. And the list goes on. And then knowing your history, which becomes a great motivator, right? So it's not repeated. I applaud you in that. Let me share another piece of information for you guys and our audience tonight. A recent survey suggested that according to the Baker Center at Georgetown University, only 11% of Americans who are over 64 question the value of living in a democracy. Only 11% will question the value, meaning 89% understand clearly the value of living in a democracy versus other forms of governance, right? Contrast that though, 32% of Americans age 18 to 29 believe that non-democracies can be preferable to democracies. 32%, a third believe of the age group 18 to 29 now, just a third, but that's still an alarming number, believe that non-democracies can be preferable to democracies. Voting, right, is a critical part of democracy. For people who don't vote, perhaps they have been disenfranchised or feel like it doesn't matter. Are they suggesting indirectly that they would like to see a non-democracy or another form of governance? Could their ignorance or lack of knowledge or frustration be leading us down a detrimental path in America away from the democracy that we so love and enjoy so many freedoms? Voting is an indicator, and it's a fundamental part of our citizenship. And I think we've got to get that message. We've got to get that message. We've got to get it across to so many more. And perhaps if we have 5 minutes at the end, we can talk about a strategy for that. But let me transition and say this. There are issues that people heard you guys talking earlier, that we vote the issues, we vote our interests, not just our fears. What are some of the issues that college age voters and young adults should be paying attention to at this period in American democracy? 400 plus years, here we are, information age. What are some of the issues we should be paying attention to? And I'll start with you, Justin, tonight. Perhaps you can share. What are some of the issues college age voters should be paying attention to?
Well, I feel that what really looms over us right now is the pandemic, and how the pandemic is just connected to so many of our futures economically, but also just, physically, and, how we live our lives. And a lot of people live their lives in fear. Personally, I secured a internship this summer that was actually canceled due to the pandemic. Wow. That opportunity sort of dried up for me, which of course God had other plans, and my summer was very impactful. But that's just one example. I'm one of probably thousands or millions of students who didn't get a chance to put that on their resume. And then you turn around and the employers are like, well, what did you do? Well, I couldn't do anything because, my internship was canceled. But the pandemic is just connected to so much stuff. And that's really an issue that we need to really figure out how to mitigate that correctly and get everybody on the same page on it, because then we can sort of go forward. And that's a lot of people our age, they're not taking it as seriously as they could be. But that can sort of point to leadership in certain places that aren't taking it seriously either.
Yeah.
So I feel like the pandemic is a very big part of what college age voters should be paying attention to.
Awesome. Alasia, what would you say? Give me an issue college age voters should be paying attention to.
I will say funding for higher education, which also would go into student loans and debt. One thing that the pandemic did help us with is kind of putting a pause on a lot of the bills that we had to pay. However, all of it comes up at once and we're going to have to pay all of that back at one. So I think when we look at, what the government is doing and how they're pausing all these different funding and these different programs for the community, that is going to impact us ultimately. I mean, look at it now with the coronavirus relief. They completely missed our whole entire generation. The college age group was completely missed out. And that's consequences that we'll have to live with into our adulthood. Like Justin mentioned, we're also not getting these jobs. I had to be, I was laid off from LSU because of the pandemic. They just didn't need me anymore. So that's something that I've been struggling with. And again, when Justin says, like, we can't get these jobs, how are we going to go into after grad school? We graduate this year. So we're going to have to go into this workforce, which isn't hiring. They can't afford to keep us on. And that ultimately is going to leave us the most stranded.
Yeah, well said. Chris Howard, what about you? What are some of the issues that college age voters should be paying attention to? So we've got the pandemic, right? We've got higher education funding. She spoke a little about jobs as well, because again, that plays into when we have a pandemic, et cetera. Anything else you would add to that?
Yeah, definitely. I think we should focus on issues that concern equity and access to economical resources. We can look at the way that previous generations have been dealt, the short end of the stick, not being able to access certain economical opportunities that others have been, not just in jobs, but in wealth creation. And I believe that if we don't focus on these issues and reverse that, then our children and children's children are going to have to suffer. And they're going to have to pick up that baton and try to pick up where we left off. So I think that it's a charge to us to focus on that long-term issue and fix that. And I believe that other things will be able to fall in place if we focus on that.
Well said. Let me go to this next question. And Kelsey, I'm going to address it to you first. This is a panel of all Black students. Why is it imperative that Black people of all ages are civically engaged? In light of history, you got some history there in Alabama, right? We got history in Louisiana. In light of the history, why should all Black people be engaged?
Well, as you said, in light of the history, because I was definitely going to go to Black people have been at the forefront of pretty much every movement that this country has ever seen happen. But besides that, I think people have to understand that when they hear politics, they think of government institutions. And, as a political science major, we're taught that politics is really the study of power. It's the study of who gets what, when, and where. And that's really just a piece of and voting is just a piece of being civically engaged. Being civically engaged goes beyond just going to the ballot box. It's holding your professionals or the political officials in your community accountable. It is helping in your community where you see fit. It's giving back to your community, your time, your effort, not just your money, but your time, your effort, and the resources that you have. We're all getting degrees, and I think we all want to utilize our degrees in what our knowledge in our community to help advance our community, and that's being civically engaged. And so I think it's important that we have to recognize that in order for us to see what we want to see on the other side, be the change that we want to see, we have to make sure that we're putting that work in our community. And the way that you do that is being civically engaged.
Well said. Well said. We want to see change. If you want to see change, you've got to be engaged. Cameron, you used the word called the bubble, that college students, we're living in that bubble. I love that word because, again, so many in the African-American experience, especially in America, are in bubbles. Whether you're in that bubble in college, you're in that bubble in your neighborhood, your part of town, you're in that bubble based upon the class or your access to capital or lack thereof, the bubble. What would you say as to why, regardless of the bubble, African Americans should be engaged in the civic process.
You should make sure I understand this correctly. Why we should be informed and engaged on the civic process?
Absolutely.
I think solely, like Kelsey said earlier, just based off of history, the fact that someone cared about you enough hundreds of years ago to fight so hard to get us to the position that we are in now, let alone no matter what position we're in now, the fact that they fought for us to be here should inspire you to fight harder for the next generation and the following generations. As Christopher said earlier, that should light that torch within you to want to pass that torch on and want to move that further. And then on a day-to-day basis, I think we're growing up in the age of in the generation of information and knowledge with the internet. We have access to so many things, for better or worse. We have social media, and social media can be both a good and a bad thing. So on a day-to-day basis, I could probably speak for my peers as well. We see our brothers and our sisters get killed on public platforms. If you don't want to go into the system and change these things, then I can't speak for you. I can't advocate for you because you don't care enough about yourself. You don't care enough about future generations, previous generations. You don't care about anything around you. I think we really need to focus on political literacy and the people that hold these positions. For example, Attorney General Daniel Cameron, this is someone that we appointed as a community to hold that position. So if we inform ourselves about these small positions, not just the national election, but these minor elections that we have, that should inspire you. If you care about your sister, like Breonna Taylor, go out, go vote, and go be literate on these small elections and these things that can change it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Young people have historically been the catalyst for change. We can look at several movements where young people, not just in college, but young people in that 18 to 29 bracket have been the catalyst for change and social justice in America. For you that know history, talk to our audience and tell them why that is. Why have we seen in times past young people be the catalyst, rise up, take the initiative, right? Some of the older generation will say, you just got here. What do you really know? Why are you that passionate? But speak to your passion. Speak to why young people have led the charge in times past and why it's important that we continue to write history well in light of the statistics I just gave you. So many are not voting. There's yet a great number of much apathy on our college campuses. But talk about why that, perhaps your perspective of why that is in times past and why it must continue. Chris Howard, we'll start with you.
Okay. Well, like you said before, the environment in which you live in shapes your ideas. It shapes your experiences. It shapes your viewpoint. So when you come in and you're ignorant to what your parents or your grandparents know as struggle, right? The behaviors that have been learned through oppression, when you don't have those on you and you're experiencing this world, you see this injustice, it's a passion inside of you that kind of just is inflamed and you want to change it partly because of the blissfulness of ignorance, not knowing how the oppression might come, that this opposition will come, right? Because you're just not aware of it. And it's very important for young people to continue to write that narrative, because in history we are the people who change environments. We're the people who change the culture. We have so much power as being like the change engine, the change agents. And it's important for us to continue to push that along. If we don't, who will? And if we continue to grow older and we have children, what are they gonna be left with? What are they gonna have to live with? And what can we say to them when they ask, what did you do in 2020 when this came up? What are you gonna have to say to them? So it's important for the people who come behind us.
Absolutely. Justin, what would you say to that same question?
So if we think back to sort of John Lewis, who passed earlier this year, they were young, they were energetic, and education was really key. They were college educated, they were opened up to really sort of how the world works. And on top of that, they understood, or were starting to understand, that they together in unity could have power. and that Black people were a force to be reckoned with, not only in numbers in some places, but economically. And when they started realizing this as young people, they decided to, in a way, go against the grain. Some people call it crazy. Some people might call it fearlessness. But to them, it was just a drive to want to see change. And if you look at our church, at our religious space, the African American religious space, it's really been sort of intrinsically tied to justice and social justice for Black people. So you're growing up in this world where you're told that, with God, anything is possible. And you're also told that there's something else for you, and that God is who we should depend on. But you're going out and seeing a world that doesn't really reflect that. So how do you gel that faith and what you want the world to be? You act, because, faith, what is faith? Faith is action. And so I feel like that is something that a lot of those young people who were educated, they were fearless, they had faith. And that's really what started them to be these change seekers. And we need to just hone in on a lot of that today.
Well said. Kelsey, anything you want to add to that?
I think everybody said everything that I would have said as well. I just believe that young people, I think as young people, we recognize that anything that happens today is going to have consequences that's going to be for futures to come. And so that drives us to put action behind the words that are being said. And that's just how it's been since the beginning of time. I mean, all of us are in NAACP, and I think in our history, it was Juanita Jackson Mitchell who created the youth and college division for the NAACP, and they were at the forefront of those movements, the Greensboro sittings in North Carolina, and in the bus boycotts. It was young people who were at the front, and I think that's because they recognize the fact that that action that they're taking now is going to create some solution that's going to be last past their generation as well. And I believe that's something that has just been continuously put into young people today.
I love it, guys. In the Jim Crow era, it primarily, especially in the South, the church was the only institution that the Black community really owned. So, and what I mean by own, institution-wide, we had stores and our own schools, etc. But the church was kind of the town hall where they met and discussed matters, organized. Not the only place, but one of the major ones that we were privy to see. At least my father sharing his story, me coming up in the early 70s, seeing that. What's the town hall now? One of the issues, especially in the African-American experience, is we are decentralized. There are multiple sources of information and sound bites. Where is the town hall? And I was going to ask the question, are the young people up to it? But I'm seeing, 5 young people who are up to it. And so I believe that God has given us great leaders and intellectual capital to lead the charge. But where will the town hall? Is it social media combined with what have you? Alasia, speak to that. Where is the proper source to get information?
Yeah, so I think for our generation, I will have to say social media is definitely the leading platform for information. This summer alone has proved that digital advocacy is a key thing for our generation. And that's how we communicate with each other. And that's how we really communicate to people outside of the Black community as well. I think that's been very apparent that this movement has, kind of mobilized through social media, through Twitter especially, and people being able to share their story and share what means to them. And, I think we saw the trend of the Black squares and looking at, the talk and kind of breaking down what it means to be Black, looking at the Black vote, voter suppression. I think these are all conversations that our generation, at least, is starting to have together. And that's one thing that we can share across any class, across any race, would be social media. So I do think that could be where our conversations are held. But I do think something that we are struggling with as a community is because we are so spread out and we have these different classes and we have different communities. Like look at LSU and Southern. I think that's something that we could really work on, is finding that common ground and looking at the different interworkings of our community and how can we connect better. And I think that's one thing that we're missing from not utilizing the Black church anymore, is not having that central place where we all come together together and kind of share these common stories. But social media definitely is on the rise, and I think that's the easiest way.
I'll say this too, guys. It's imperative that we learn from the past that what brought many together was not just their pain, but their faith and their values. So institutions with shared faith, shared values still play a critical role, whether it's your fraternities and sororities in AACP. We've got to lead in with what are our core values. Of course, as a pastor, I know the church plays a critical role and will play a critical role, but we've got to, again, bring and place value on these institutions and not allow a generation to devalue them when they've been pillars for so long. Are you following me? And the communication channels to lead us to the promised land or to our desired success. I want to keep it moving. Talk to me, how are you educating your peers and family members on civic and government issues and why that's important? How are you personally doing it? How are you, Cameron, how are you personally educating your peers and family members on civic and government issues?
Personally, I haven't been able to discuss with my family as of lately due to being at school, but on a day-to-day basis while at LSU, especially within NAACP, that is a great platform to have, whether that be in Free Speech Alley, which is pretty much our little section for students to come go outside, advocate for whatever issues they want to discuss. So we have voter registration tables, we have stay woke sessions over Zoom, we have game nights, we have small events. Though I think those small events are the ones that matter the most, honestly, because those big things, they happen every once and again. But those small things, that's what people slowly start to remember, whether that's handing out a brochure, whether that's giving out a sticky note, whether that's putting up a board outside. All those small things, slowly but surely, those will build up, and it'll cause a snowfall effect to where eventually you won't see it, but it'll lead to you stockpiling of it'll lead to a stockpiling of knowledge. Now you'll be completely informed on the upcoming elections locally. You'll be informed on Mayor Broom. You'll be informed on who's running for senator. You'll be informed on all these small things. So I think on a day-to-day basis at LSU, I think I try to just go out on Free Speech Alley, go hold a Zoom session, go post on Instagram on NAACP's account, on my personal account, and just inform everyone about what's going on locally, nationally, whether that be state, so on and so forth.
Awesome. Alasia, anything you would add to that as far as something you're doing?
Yes, I think I 100% agree with Cam. I think another thing that with our generation, you really do have to meet people where they are. One thing that's very apparent is that we do have voter apathy, and while that we shouldn't have it, it is something that's very real, and I understand why people have it. So I think with NAACP, with Black Women Empowerment Initiative, one thing that we always try to do is have these conversations, but like allow space for people to be upset and give them the resources and, fact checking people, or just obviously helping them with different articles so they can educate themselves sometimes can be more helpful than just you always giving your opinion. So I think that's something that NAACP has really tried to do as well in holding these different seminars and breaking down these politically correct terms and looking at the foundation of what these items mean. Looking at the First Amendment that is on the ballot, breaking down what is the ballot, how do we even vote, what does it mean to register? I think that's really important. That's some of the work that we've been trying to do at LSU.
That is awesome to hear. Let me share this with you, and it's a proverbial truth. Perhaps I would say it's been said that the difference many times between good and great is exposure. You can be doing a lot of good things, but if you don't have the right collaborative partners, if you don't have the right collaboration with teams and people and resources to help you get exposure, are you following me? A good thing never becomes a great thing in our community, whether it's, from popularity to impact. And I'm really speaking to impact. And I will say to your generation, with the wisdom God has given you, the creativity that I'm hearing, don't be afraid to ask for help and to ask for partners to push your message and your voice, because it matters. And I really believe God has anointed you all in critical ways to impact the marketplace, the synthesis of business, government, and education for the greater good. So continue doing what you're doing. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Let's switch real quick and go back to this election. What type of qualities should young voters look for in an elected official? I'm gonna come to you, Kelsey, first. What type of qualities should a young voter look for in an elected official? Now, we've got all kind of characteristics, behaviors we've seen from number 45. So what should we be looking for?
We should definitely look for somebody that can spell. That would be great. But on a real note, I think that the first thing that you have to do is you have to figure out what do you want as a person and for your community. What are your interests? And then you have to go out and you compare that interest into what the candidate that or the prospective candidates have to offer. I would look at their legislative history if they have been in the legislature, any history of advocacy that they have done in the community that surrounds you, and then what are their thoughts and how they feel about certain issues that impact you. I know a lot of people, we've seen it a lot with the recent hearings with Amy Coney Barrett, where she didn't feel like her faith or her past endeavors personally mattered, but what you do personally, what you sign your name on, says a lot about how you feel about things. And so therefore, if they don't align with the values that you have personally, then that candidate is just not for you and you should look for somebody else. So I think the first thing that every young person needs to do is just figure out what's important to them and then compare it to the history and the advocacy and just the interest in how these politicians think. And that's how you decide what candidate is the best candidate in your opinion.
Awesome. Chris, speak to what kind of qualities are you looking for in an elected official?
3 important qualities to me. First one being integrity. Do they switch when the moment is right for them? And if they do, that's not somebody I'm looking for. The second one being, who are they submitted to? What are they submitted to? Like, who do they put their faith into? I'm really faith-based, and if I don't believe that somebody is centered by God, it's more difficult for me to put my trust in that person. And the third, which is kind of controversial, I'm looking for somebody who is an independent thinker. Yeah, you might be part of a political party, but are you more worried about the issue, or are you worried about pleasing people? Are you worried about being in, right? These two groups, Democratic and Republican, have become so polarized that we can't get things done. I'm looking for someone who's going to break that, because that's the only way that we can really change society and make the tough decisions to come together. So those are 3.
Chris, so are you looking for a dictator? Are you saying you want somebody who would just take the bull by the horn and just make it happen? Get it done, get out of these parties. Are you saying that or not?
No, that's not necessarily what I'm saying. It doesn't, you can be part of a party, but are you willing to listen? Are you willing to collaborate with somebody who isn't in the same party, doesn't necessarily have the same political affiliation as you do? If y'all values line up on this issue, are you willing to budge for the greater good of the community? That's what I'm saying.
Gotcha. Justin, what do you look for in a political candidate?
Well, I think a lot of people shy away from saying the word politician, but I actually love the word politician because of just what you articulated. Somebody who exists in the American form of democracy has to know how it works. In America, politics is power and power is winning. So if you know how to navigate that space and you have the right demands, the right synergy, you'll do good work. And, Frederick Douglass said, power sees nothing without a demand. And what are the demands that you're bringing from your community? Are you listening to my demands? Do your demands match up to mine? And are you actually going to be demanding when you get there? You're not just sitting in the office, going to the round tables, going to the dinners, and just being in the office. But are you really looking to enact change? So I'm looking for a politician, somebody who knows how to navigate the American politics space, because people see that as a bad word, but I see that as a plus. If you actually know how to navigate it, because that's what it is. American is politics. So I'm looking for somebody who knows how to navigate that space and is actually demand and action based.
I like it. I like it. So I'm gonna take this question to everybody. I want to hear everybody give me at least one thing. Or Cameron, what are you looking for? What should you be looking for in an elected official in this time?
I think especially experiencing my adolescence and my early adulthood with Mr. 45. I think the two biggest things coming off of this are adaptability and morality. If we look at Donald Trump and how he handled COVID-19, he wasn't able to adapt. So I want a president that, in the midst of a crisis, I know you can adapt. You can get America to adapt. I think John Bell Edwards did a great job with this, with how he was stern on certain things. He adapted to the environment. Another thing that is really big with me is morality. Like I said originally, whether your decision is aligned with the Black community, the white community, Asian, Hispanic community, you have morals within them. There are certain lines that you won't cross. There are boundaries that you won't cross. Refer back to Donald Trump again. I don't think Donald Trump is a man with many morals. There are a lot of things that he will say, that he will do without any guidelines, without any barriers. And like Chris said, no matter what religion you are, I want to know that you have morals, you have faith, that there are boundaries that you won't cross, that whatever choice you will make will be for the greater good of America as a whole, not just for your community, not just for the Proud Boys, not just for people that live in the 1% in this community. I want to know that you have morals and that your ideas range from lower class to higher class, and that every community is included within whatever decision you make.
That's great to know, because a lot of people forget in this democratic process that, whatever group you're with, whatever agenda you have, your group is not the only group that's paying taxes. Your group is not the only group that's contributing to a government having any money to spend. Your group is not the only group that's bringing creativity and ingenuity to our marketplace, right? Making sacrifices. And so you got to have competency and intellectual capital in that space, emotional intelligence. You got to have that in a leader at that office, whether it's at the presidential office. We got a mayor election coming up, right? We got Supreme Court nominees being put in place. We've got, of course, several Senate seats that's up for election. We got Malaysia, you want to speak to it?
I guess the only trait I think we're missing here that we were kind of touching on would be empathy. I think the ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes is really important, especially at the highest office. They obviously can't come up with every issue for every single problem, but at the same time, you need to have some sort of emotional ability to think and look at somebody else and care about what they're going through. You need to look at somebody who is at the opposite end of the totem pole as you, who's maybe in a complete different class than you, has a complete different life. And I mean, that really was the American dream, is us coming from all these different backgrounds. But honestly, 45 is not cutting it. He's not empathetic at all. And that's something that I think I'm really looking forward to. I don't know if we'll get it this election, but in general, you really do need to be a part of being a good politician is being empathetic.
Absolutely. We got 5 minutes left. And I want to say, you all have done a wonderful job. And, I would love to take all of you out to Ruth Chris and we continue this conversation. Justin and Chris, hold me accountable to it. I'll do that if you guys want to. That's on me. But here's what's important. Youth turnout could actually be the deciding factor in this year's election. Youth turnout, whether it's a mayor election, Senate election, presidential election, youth turnout. I gave you the statistics. I started with some statistics. I'll close with that same statistic. 48% on average of college students voted in 2016 against the national average of 61%. If you've got 15 to 18 million plus college students in college, and you have only 50% of that number voting, that could be anywhere between 7 to 10 to 8, maybe 8 million voters or votes not accounted for and could decide the election. What's your compelling speech, 30 seconds or less, to that young face, why we must vote now and the consequences of not voting? Justin, we'll start with you.
And like I started, just look at historically the African-American experience of slavery to racial terror to Jim Crow, and then look at why they've wanted to take your vote from you. If it didn't matter, they let everybody do it. So just know that and act accordingly, and be, like everybody says, if you want to see some change, be the change.
Absolutely. Cameron, you next, sir.
I'll keep mine brief. Go on social media, move around, go around Baton Rouge locally outside of your college campus. Look at the communities that are right outside of where we are. Do you want to change those? Are these things that you want to change? Do you want to improve this community for when you have kids, when your children have children? I can speak for myself, and when I look into my nephew's eyes, I want his experience growing up to be completely separate than mine. I don't want him to have the experience of Trayvon Martin. So please go out and flex your right to vote.
Well said. Well said. Alasia?
So we had a panel with NAACP and Dr. Cody Roberts. He's a professor at LSU. One thing that he said was revolutionaries do not turn down power. And I think that is something really important to remember, is that this election, every election afterwards, is going to be super important and integral, and it will have consequences. So like Cam and Justin mentioned, if you want to look into the next generation's eyes and tell them that you didn't vote and you didn't do anything to change it, then do what you want to do. But if you want to make a difference and you want to leave an impact, then you'll cast your ballot.
Well said. Kelsey?
My compelling argument would be that voting and going out to the ballot box makes you a constituent in their eyes, makes you somebody that they care about impressing and keeping you on their side. So take that issue that you're so passionate about, and you go and you take that passion to the ballot box, and that passion and that vote gets you to the table to discuss that issue that you want to create change around. So.
Absolutely. Well said. Chris?
The world needs you. You have such a critical moment. We are living in such a critical time that the decision that you make will determine the future. What future do you want to live in?
Well said, guys. And I want to just wrap it up by saying, again, there are a lot of issues on the table. And I want to continue to challenge you all to let your voice be heard. And for those who are perhaps in between or opinions on, am I going to participate, not just in voting, but post the election? How do I ensure that there is accountability with those who are in office, whether it was my candidate or not? Because there are things on the table. Justin spoke about it. COVID-19, the pandemic, that's not going anywhere. Do we have the right leadership that's going to manage that pandemic and get the economy back working? Jobs and the economy, it's at stake. Racial justice and equity, you guys talked about it earlier, that's at stake. Healthcare, we're still indecisive on, are we going to, and what type of healthcare are we going to provide? Student loan forgiveness. Are we going to deal with this bubble of charging so much to go to college and then there are no jobs when you come out, or jobs that are commensurate and allow you to live the American dream? All those issues are on the table. And so for young people, we've got to not only vote, but we've got to have accountability structures. We've got to have committees that are working together, challenging the status quo, constantly asking our elected officials and even the private sector to put the best ideas before us. Are you following me? Choosing the harder right versus the easier wrong. Don't let any politician get off on an easy path post the election. We've got to keep the press and bring about the change we desire to see in the world. Listen, guys, you did a phenomenal job tonight. We love you. Thank you, Dr. Christy Perry, for allowing us to come on and engage this audience. I'm not sure if we had a question from the audience or not, but if you do, we can answer you in writing at a later time. We're out of time. But again, if you're a college student and you would like to be a part of our college campus ministry, you can text LLS to 225-250-1970. That's LLS 225-250-1970. Until next time, and there will be a next time, God bless you. God bless America. God bless our communities. Love you. Have a good night.